Good afternoon. Welcome to this month's Research Matters. I'm Erica Salzik, the Department Administrator for UT Southwestern's Human Research Protection Program, and I will be one of the moderators for today's session. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items quickly. So first, and as always, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them in the Q&A. One of the moderators will respond to you during the session, or we will address it at the end of the presentation. This session is recorded and will be available immediately after the conclusion of the live session by clicking on the Microsoft Teams live link in the Outlook appointment. We will send the slides and handouts out via the listserv, and you will also be able to access the slides, handouts, and recordings on HRPP's Research Matters website, which can be found under the Training and Resources page. We do provide a certificate of attendance for those who have logged in using a valid email address. If you do not receive one via email but should have, please send an email to hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu to request a certificate. And finally, we want to hear from you. We are interested to know what topics you would like us to cover during these sessions. How did our speakers do and how our office is doing? So if you can please take a few minutes to complete the survey to provide feedback, that would be excellent. I have provided a QR code that will allow you to scan and complete the survey from your phone. And I'll also be dropping the link for the survey in the Q&A in just a moment. Here is the agenda for today. So we will have some updates from our office, and that's being presented by Maya Begeza. Then we have Rasija Nambiar from our Regulatory Support Office, who will present an update on metrics. And next we have Rhonda Aleppo, our Assistant Vice President for Human Research Administration, who will present on the state of the HRPP. She is going to cover current projects and future plans for the department. And as always, we will conclude with an open Q&A session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mad.
Thank you, Erica. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes.
So, Happy New Year. Today I'm going to go over just a few general announcements. So first up, we have removing IRB approved forms in eIRB. So within the Documents tab, we have all of the forms that have been approved by the IRB. We're asking that you avoid removing IRB approved forms within the eIRB system. There's a formal modification process that you should undergo to request the removal or changes to any approved documentation. And once the modification has been approved, the investigative relations team will ensure that the appropriate documents have been updated, removed, so on and so forth within the Documents tab. So that's just a quick reminder about that. Next up, this is also a reminder. We've updated the consent form language specific to research-related injury. So in situations where there's a CTA and there's a CTA-specific language that needs to be included in the consent form, we allow for that particular language to be included in the red text here. So this is just a reminder that we've updated the consent form. Other consent form changes that are in the works are so we've been in the works with changing some of the terms throughout our consent documents to use gender neutral terms. And that's with respect to the introduction and throughout where we talk about women and male and the reproductive risk language. We're also making updates to the radiation exposure risk language. And then finally, we are going to be sending out a survey because it's come to our attention that sometimes when studies involve children, some investigators prefer to have an assent document. And so we're going to be sending out a survey to assess the need for an assent template. So be on the lookout for that email soon. So another announcement that I have is with regard to Parkland and when there's patient-facing materials. So the IRB's responsibility with regard to ensuring that the study meets criteria for IRB approval is that the consent form be presented to a patient or the patient population in a language that's understood by that population. And situations where researchers plan to conduct research at Parkland and there's patient-facing materials, and those can be consent forms, those can be surveys, diaries, those types of things. There should be plans in place to translate the consent form and other patient-facing materials to Spanish. Parkland's patient population is 50% Spanish speaking. So again, it's important for the IRB to have this, the plans for translating those patient-facing materials into Spanish. If the PI does not have the resource available to translate those patient-facing materials to Spanish, those investigators can use the translation service that we provide. We are in the process of working on a revision to the Form C so that the PI can inform the IRB their plans to obtain translated materials when Parkland is a study site. We also would allow for, in that particular area, for PIs to tell us that they want to use the translation service. And what we could actually do at the time that we approve the study is go ahead and initiate a quote. And so kind of to get a leg up on that quicker, sooner rather than later. A link for the translation service can be found here. Another update is with regard to certificates of confidentiality. So if you're not familiar with those are certificates or COCs that protect the privacy of research participants by prohibiting disclosure of identifiable sensitive research information to anyone that's not connected with the research. These certificate of confidentialities or COCs are automatically issued to researchers who receive federal funding. As of October 1st, 2017, for studies that were unfunded or were initiated prior to October 1st, 2017, a request can be made to obtain one. So what we're kind of talking about right now is in situations where an investigator has submitted a grant and they're not sure if they're going to receive the federal award, we're asking that investigators remove the certificate of confidentiality language from the consent form because we want to help the investigator avoid a situation where perhaps they don't get the award. That information is still in the consent form. And if they start consenting participants, that those participants are going to have incorrect information. So our team has been instructed to verify the status of the funding, federal funding. And if it's in a state of pending, we're going to ask that a modification be submitted at a later time when the award is actually made to add back the language regarding certificate of confidentiality. Next up, we have a couple of updates from THR. So one of the updates they have is whenever you're conducting a study at IEEM, you no longer have to select Texas Health Resources within the application. THR actually gets notified anytime that IEEM is selected within the application. So again, no need to select THR on the study site locations. Another update is THR has decided to not move forward with the renewing their city program contract. So with that in mind, they're asking that the researchers conduct the city training that's associated with UT Southwestern. They can affiliate with UT Southwestern and those modules will appear. They have access to individuals who have completed city training under the affiliation with UT Southwestern. So another big update, this is congruency updates with regard to research-related injury language and the cost section. So our AHRQ site visit identified an area of opportunity, specifically surrounding the confirmation that the injury language is congruent with the clinical trial agreement language. Along with this, the opportunity, the IRB and SPA are working collectively with ensuring that the congruency of the cost section to the consent form is also in place. So when we talk about this change is applicable to new studies. And kind of how it's going to work is that when the CT is being worked on by SPA group, they're going to have a coverage analysis analyst that will work with the analyst that's assigned to pre-review the submission. And obviously this is in a situation where there's time to do this, and before IRB review, they'll identify in a situation where the consent form language is not consistent with the CTA language, specifically for research-related injuries. If the coverage analysis has been finalized and is available, they'll also make sure that the cost section of the consent form is also congruent. When a correction is necessary to the language, the coverage analysis analyst will reach out to the IRB analyst and provide the appropriate language or note regarding the cost section. The IRB analyst will work with the research team to update the coverage analysis the language in the consent form, and then inform the coverage analysis analyst of the outcome, just in case if the researcher still needs to negotiate that particular component of the contract. In situations where the study has already been reviewed by the IRB, either through expedited review or the full board, but is waiting for other approvals, the investigative relations team will reach out to the research team and request a mod if the injury language or the cost section needs to be updated. The IRT team will then provide the research-related injury language or advise on required updates to the cost section of the consent form. So just know that this is on the horizon. So when you get contacted about research-related injury language or the cost section, this is kind of the works in the background. And then one final update, this is really kind of a reminder. So once the department chair or division chair has approved the submission, that basically triggers the submission to, it shows up that the IRB has received the submission. And once we assign an IRB analyst, we have to signal that PRMC review is required. So this is a manual process. It's not an automatic process. I also want to note that whenever we signal for that review, PRMC receives the submission and they're going to contact the research team to notify that there is a separate submission that is required, separate from the EIRB application. And the IRB analysts are asked to hold the study until, at a minimum, PRMC has reviewed the study, received all their application materials, reviewed the study, and have either approved the study outright or have conditionally approved it. And our team is really looking at those conditional approval statements to make sure that none of those statements have a bearing on whether we can say that the study meets regulatory criteria for approval. So the IRB, once the IRB receives it and approval is in place and there's no other issues with the submission, the study will be approved outright. If we have just a conditional approval in place with PRMC and there are no other issues, the IRB will stipulate that we will issue final IRB approval once the conditions of PRMC have been met. So this is just kind of, again, a reminder. And that is the end of my updates. I will turn things over to Rasija.
Thank you, Mayad. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rasija from the Regulatory Support Office, and I work with Eriko Ivatate and Raj Vardarajan to support clinicaltrials.gov reporting and sponsor investigator and IND, IDE, and EAP submissions. Today, before giving you quick updates on CT.gov and SI support program metrics, I would like to remind you about the pilot phase of our CT.gov program's hybrid service that we had launched in October last year. This hybrid service includes intake of 5 registration bookings for full service, along with continuing with self-service model, where we continue to guide study teams and provide partial service. Our future goal is to eventually expand our services further so that we can offer more full services to help our investigators stay in compliance. So to book us for full service to register your study in CT.gov, all you would need to do is to send an email to the CT.gov inbox at this address shown on the screen, or if you want to discuss with us before you proceed booking, you can click on this one-on-one consultation link on our CT.gov support page within the HRPP website. This month, 2 slots have already been booked, but we do have 3 slots available for full service bookings for registration. I would like to remind that for now, These full service requests are on a first come first basis. So when you email us to do the booking, if the slots have already been booked for that month, we will roll it over and put you on the next month's booking. Please note, when you do the booking, you need to provide us with a copy of your protocol or the STU number. And once we finish entering the study information, please be available to provide us with any further information that is requested about your study. And last but not the least, the best part is that it is free for now. So hurry and book your spots now. Now, a quick glance on ct.gov's compliance metrics. In 2022 December last year, we were able to maintain 100% compliance according to the public FEDA non-compliance website. A quick reminder that NIH has started sending out non-compliance notices to investigators who are overdue on reporting results on their NIH-funded clinical trials. Hence, I would like to highlight some points to remember for ct.gov reporting. That is, start working on the results 3 to 4 months prior to the due date for results submission. Since results reporting may take up to 50 hours depending on the complexities of the trial. And on an average, ct.gov results review cycle may take up to 30 days. I've also mentioned some additional key points here regarding registration, which you can take a look. And here is the overall real-time compliance for all records under UT Southwestern's organizational PRS account. Non-compliance tracker in the previous slide only captures FDA-regulated clinical trial results. It doesn't include NIH-funded clinical trials that are not FDA-regulated or voluntary submissions. This table includes all records that are registered under the UT Southwestern account. Red and orange are the records with problems or non-compliant ones. Green indicates records without any problems, and blue is the total records that UT Southwestern oversees. As you can see here, we had 2 FEDA problem records that showed up in our internal problem record list in December last year for late results reporting. One of which was due to the responsible party who had already left the institution. But we were able to quickly take care of these records by providing full assistance to both these teams. We were also able to bring down the number of non-FEDA problems in the month of December compared to November last year. Since our RSO team is fairly new, we continue to have a lot of cross trainings and new services like full support for registration added to our activities. So if there have been any delays from our end, we really apologize. But as you see, we are still doing good overall and are able to keep the problem record low in spite of the total record numbers increasing each month. Here is a summary of our sponsor investigator support program for your reference. Once again, we assist sponsor investigator with IND, IDE, or expanded access application, as well as the maintenance activities. To the left, you can see the sponsor investigator support metrics based on the type of consultations. And to the right, it's based on the type of FDA submissions. Before I wind up again, here is a contact and consultation booking link for ct.gov support. Here is the selected list of resources for ct.gov. This is a contact list and link to the consultation for sponsor investigator IND, IDE, expanded access related questions. And finally, this is the selected list of resources for sponsor investigator IND, IDE, EAP support. Thank you all. Thank you for your time listening to me, and I'll pass it over to Rhonda.
All right. Thank you, Rasija. And hello, everyone. Before we get into the state of the HRPP, I wanted to briefly discuss the new NIH data sharing policy and how it relates to human research. So what is the NIH requirement? Beginning January 25th, 2023, which is just next week, the NIH will require the submission of a Data Management and Sharing Plan, or DMS, for all new or competing renewal grant applications for any research that may generate scientific data. And that data must be shared at the time of publication or at the end of the award, whichever comes first. So the goal of this policy is really to encourage sharing of scientific data and will promote research discovery. This applies only to NIH-supported projects that generate scientific data and would not apply to any other projects such as training or infrastructure grants. So what are we doing at UT Southwestern to prepare? An institutional readiness group was formed more than 6 months ago to prepare for the requirement. Attendees include sponsored programs, regulatory support and research management, the HRPP, the Research Integrity Office, and the library. A presentation to the faculty was delivered in December of 2022, and several emails have been sent out from Dr. Conaway and Dr. Peterson announcing the requirement to UT Southwestern faculty. In addition, a website and central email inbox were developed. The website is available on the My UT Southwestern page and is updated regularly as new information becomes available. And finally, campus newsletters and listservs have included information about the new requirement. So when considering plans for data sharing of human research data, there are ethical and compliance considerations. So regarding privacy, consider that sharing plans must adhere to any governing privacy laws or policies. So that would include those from tribal nations or even other countries as applicable. So here you think about HIPAA, FERPA, GDPR, etc. Also, you want to consider that data from outside sources may only be shared in a manner that's permitted by any applicable funding agreements, collaboration, or data sharing agreements. So if you have a data use agreement in place, your sharing needs to be consistent with the terms of those agreements. And we also have to consider confidentiality and informed consent for any human-derived data. So if you have unconsented data from human participants, it may only be shared in a controlled manner, which would be closed access repositories. The data should be de-identified, and if data cannot be de-identified, it may not be shared without explicit consent from the participants. Any limitations or prohibitions in informed consent documents should govern how the data can be shared. And finally, there may be a need for special considerations for the sharing of data from any vulnerable populations, such as pregnant people and children. So what are the IRB expectations for sharing human research data? The green box here represents the ability to share open access, to share widely. And the red boxes are when data should be shared in controlled access repositories. I want to point out first that in all cases, the sharing of the data must not pose greater than minimal risk to any rights, safety, or welfare of participants or groups. And the sharing described in the IRB approved protocol must be consistent with the data management sharing plan that was approved by the NIH. And if they're not consistent, then you will be required to revise one or the other. So to begin with, if consent was obtained and it was explicit for the sharing of data to an open access repository, first, remember, identifiers should be removed. And the consent form itself should explicitly outline the data to be shared and that the data will be shared in an open access environment. Now, if consent is explicitly obtained for a controlled access repository, the best practice is to remove identifiers. However, the consent should specify the data and identifiers that will be shared in those repositories. The consent should also include a description of any controls that are in place for sharing of the data. For example, is IRB approval required before recipients may receive the data? The controls that are required should be communicated to the repository before you send the data over. So where consent may have been obtained, but didn't discuss the data sharing plan, such as consent obtained before January 25th, 2023, the data should only be de-identified or a limited data set. You should only submit that data to controlled access repositories. And if any special controls or restrictions are required, make sure you communicate those to the repository. And finally, for data that was obtained with an IRB-approved waiver of consent, the data must be identified. You have to remove all direct and indirect identifiers before sharing that data, and only submit to controlled access repositories. And again, if any special controls or restrictions are required, make sure that you communicate that to the repository up front. So for controlled access, some required controls are those that may vary based on the type or sensitivity of the data, the likelihood of re-identification, or maybe there are other conditions in place for the study, such as a certificate of confidentiality. So what is the IRB responsibility and review of the data management and sharing plan? So the IRB will review the DMS plans. However, right now, the timing of that IRB review is uncertain. So we're still thinking through this. Likely there will be a question added to EIRB, and I can almost reassure you that we will not conduct the review at just in time. We just don't have the capacity to do that, and we also need to make sure that the DMS plan is consistent with the IRB approved protocol. So in terms of what the IRB is going to review and determine, the IRB will determine that sharing must not pose a greater risk than minimal to the right, safety, or welfare of participants, and that, again, the sharing that's described in the IRB approved protocol is consistent with the DMS plan to NIH. So if not, so if a DMS plan was submitted to NIH at the time of the grant submission, and the IRB approved protocol doesn't match that, you'll need to revise that DMS plan with the NIH and get approval for the revised plan, or revise your IRB protocol to be consistent. So because this is a new policy and NIH hasn't completed all guidance yet, for example, they have yet to come out with their guidance on how we're going to ensure compliance for data sharing plans. We still anticipate several changes and updates this first year. So, however, to be prepared, I want you to be on the lookout for new frequently asked questions and guidance documents from the HRPP. These will be sent out on our listserv, likely within the next week. And you may also go to the UT Southwestern's DMS website for more information and updates. If you have any questions about a DMS plan or a proposed plan, make sure to send an email to the data sharing email that's on the screen. They'll make sure that your question gets to the right group to answer your questions. And finally, take some time to review the 2 relevant NIH supplements for human-derived data for any more information that you might need. Right. And switching gears now, we're going to discuss the state of the HRPP, where we were and where we're headed. So this wheel is just a reminder of sort of the complexity of the HRPP and all of the different components that make up the Human Research Protection Program. The green bubbles on the screen are the only components that are actually housed within the HRPP department, or the responsibility of the HRPP department. So you can see that, you know, it's a complex web that we live in every single day. This timeline represents the history of the HRPP department since 2009. So of note, I really want to point out that the EIRB system was initially developed in 2009 and was rolled out in 2010. So I think you could agree that it's probably time for a new system. We were also initially accredited in 2019 by AHRQ, and we just went through our reaccreditation in 2022, and now we're reaccredited for 5 more years. So this is the org structure for the HRPP, and shows sort of where the HRPP is in relation to the Office of Clinical Research. Dr. Eric Peterson is our institutional official, and he has both the Office of Clinical Research and the HRPP reporting to him. The Office of Clinical Research, which is led by Dr. Papu, is focused on operational aspects of clinical research, while the HRPP is focused on regulatory requirements for human research. So now just to briefly talk through some of the responsibilities of the HRPP department. We have within the IRB office, they're responsible for the review of research at UT Southwestern, Parkland, Children's, Scottish Rite, THR, and any other sites that might rely on us. They complete IRB pre-review, review expedited, exempt, non-human, non-research projects, manage 4 institutional review boards, They also complete reliance review to ensure that any local non-IRB requirements are met when we rely on an outside IRB. We act as a single IRB for collaborative research, where our IRB is actually ensuring that IRB requirements are met for any relying sites. The IRB office is also responsible for coordinating ancillary committees and ensuring any review and approvals are secured, as well as considering when conflict of interest is in play and communicating any management plans from the COI committee to the IRB. The IRB office is responsible for reporting to any internal, external federal agencies, approvals, terminations, suspensions, unanticipated problems, serious or continuing noncompliance. And the IRB acts as the privacy board to ensure HIPAA requirements are met. And of course, also responsibility of the IRB office is also quality improvement, so reviewing metrics, satisfaction surveys, and managing any IRB agreements with other institutions to ensure compliance with terms. The Quality Assurance and Monitoring Office, on the other hand, they are responsible for post-approval monitoring. So they conduct both for-cause and routine audits of studies. They also provide support to investigators if the FDA comes to audit, and God forbid, following the audits, if observations are noted, this team will help respond to any observations. In addition, they monitor the IRB and review the IRB records for quality. So they look at things like the IRB minutes, EIRB documentation, letters, etc. The Regulatory Support Office, which you just heard from Rasija, supports investigators who are sponsors and hold their own INDs and IDEs, and supports them with maintaining any compliance with FDA requirements, and also assists investigators and study teams with clinicaltrials.gov reporting requirements. So they provide tracking, registration, updates, results, and will even assist with consent posting requirements. And then in general, the HRPP department is responsible for ensuring that our research community is trained and has received the appropriate ethics education. So we established the minimum educational regulatory requirements, provide continuing education to IRB members and the research community. We are also developing a clinical research coordinator educational curriculum. We're coordinating that with the Office of Clinical Research under the CTSA, and I'll discuss that in more detail soon. And finally, any participant advocacy and outreach, we manage or address complaints or concerns from participants. So now I want to take a look at metrics for the HRPP offices, and starting with the IRB office. So in this slide, you can see the volume of study approvals from 2016 through 2022, and this is calendar years. There is a notable shift between the exempt and expedited volume of approvals in 2019. We know that's the result of the common rule change, where most secondary data projects are now eligible for exemption. In 2020, we also noted an increase in study approvals by approximately 200 more than what we've been seeing year over year. And that's likely a result of the increase in COVID-related research. We saw quite a few studies coming through, and our volumes were still just as high otherwise. So now looking at turnaround over the years, I'd say that we're doing a pretty good job. We are impacted by the Great Resignation, as are most other departments and offices. I am noting that the times are starting to increase slightly in 2022, and so we're actually working right now on a Lean Six Sigma engagement, Mayed and I are, to try to bring those numbers back down. But overall, we're still maintaining relatively close to our goal lines for each of the different review types. But we can always do better. And just as a reminder, you can always go to our website to see the metrics anytime. So if you go to our main page, scroll about halfway or 3/4 of the way down under metrics, you can click on that link and see our updated metrics. So now on to the quality assurance and monitoring metrics. In 2022, the QAM team led by Kim Mapes completed 77 monitoring visits. And in those visits, they identified 140 observations. In addition to the 77 visits, they conducted 31 visits for a sponsor investigator protocol to meet their FDA regulatory requirements. This is a study where the PI actually holds the IND and was required to have a monitor. And so the QAM team provided that monitoring support for that investigator. The team also assisted on 4 FDA audit visit preparations. And then on the pie chart on the right, you can see that of the observations that were identified in the reviews of the 140 observations, regulatory documentation and study records remains the most frequent observation that the team finds. We are hoping that with the rollout of the Florence eBinder, that this number starts to go down and helps investigators manage their regulatory documents. We also noticed that noncompliance with the protocol, IRB regulations, etc., is identified in 16% of the reviews, and consent issues are still being identified frequently in 18% of those reviews. So looking at the metrics from the Regulatory Support Office for 2022, I realized that Rosija stole my thunder a little bit, but I'll show you the graph on the left is showing clinicaltrials.gov support since September of 2022. And you can see the types of support investigators are needing help with when actually interfacing with the clinicaltrials.gov system. Support provided involves the Regulatory Support Office monitoring clinicaltrials.gov, notifying and assisting investigators in making any updates to the system and responding to PRS comments. The team assisted with meeting submission requirements on 30 projects in those 3 months. I realized I didn't add in December there. All right, we'll need to do that. And I want to mention that some of the support provided here was full service, meaning that the Regulatory Support Office completed all the activities for the PI, and the PI simply confirmed and released the records, which takes a lot of burden off the shoulders of the study team. So that is the free service that Rosija had just advertised. The graph on the right is reflecting the type of FDA submission support requested by investigators in 2022. The team helped with a total of 16 initial submissions, 18 amendments, and 11 annual report submissions to the FDA. Of note, the support is not only with the submission to the FDA, but also providing assistance in responding to any FDA information requests or clarifications. Okay, so now let's look at some of our accomplishments this past year. So to start with, we hired new staff. We hired a new IRB director, Mayed Begeza, started with us in March. We also have a new position supported by the CTSA, that's the Clinical Research Educator. We hired Sandra Moronis into that role. We hired 3 new regulatory analysts, Brendan Pullman, Paula Ariano Cruz, and Young-Soo Han. And finally, a new regulatory monitoring analyst, Italia Hutchinson, joined the team in the spring. We are really proud that we were reaccredited for an additional 5 years after a GrowLink site visit in October. This time, the AHRQ site visit team identified areas of strength and in terms of what we're doing well. They called out the conflict of interest system and the incorporation of the training in that system, and then how the COI information is linked to EIRB through the user profile. It really helps us sort of keep track of disclosures and when conflicts are in play. Also, they pointed out the abundance of resources, tools, and training that are provided to support the HRPPN research community. And finally, in terms of strengths, they found that our non-scientist community IRB members were extremely enthusiastic and dedicated, and they really left an impression on the site visitors. This time around, we were identified to have an area of distinction, which is what, in the AHRQ Council's opinion, other institutions should consider to model after us. And that was our translation process. And just acting as sort of the go-between between our investigators and our translation company. And we have a PO in place with our translation company, so we can submit for quotations for you for your translation. We can pay up front and then collect money back from you afterwards to allow those translations to go through more quickly. We also officially established the Regulatory Support Office with the hiring of Dr. Eriko Iwatate as the director of that office. And as a reminder, the RSO supports sponsor investigators in meeting their requirements with clinicaltrials.gov and FDA. Probably the most exciting for everyone here is that the EIRB redesign is finally in motion. Hashtag new system, as we've been referring to for many, many years. We did start meeting with our selected vendor, who is Polis, is their name, and we started meeting with them in the spring of 2022. The redesign is currently in progress, and go live is anticipated later this summer. Fingers crossed. And last but not least, our OHRP audit from 2017 was finally closed out in March. It just took 5 years to get that letter. But everything came through fine. You can read the letter on the internet. It's public information. So what's next for the HRPP this year? This year, we're focusing on education and, of course, EIRB and the EIRB redesign. So let's start with the education. With the CTSA award in 2021, one of the aims of which I'm responsible for is to develop a comprehensive training for our frontline workers. That's the clinical research coordinators. So currently, the expectation is that this training will be required for all incoming coordinators. When the details have been firmed up, we'll provide more information to you about those requirements. The curriculum itself will ensure that all coordinators receive the same level and quality of basic training. The curriculum is designed to ensure that coordinators are provided with training on 8 core competencies that are considered to be required of clinical research professionals, and that's the wheel on the right-hand side there of the screen. The competency framework was developed by the MRCT Joint Task Force for Clinical Trial Competency, not by us. I've been working with Lucy Palmer in the Office of Clinical Research and Sandra Moronis, our new clinical research educator, to develop the curriculum. And the onboarding or basic curriculum will be online and self-paced. We'll include 2 original courses. Both of them will be recorded and also available online. The first course is an Intro to Clinical Research at UT Southwestern and affiliates, and it will include a high-level introduction to over 40 offices, committees, and institutions that touch clinical research at our institutions. The second course is Scientific Principles of Research, and it'll be taught by Dr. Heidi Jacoby. This course will introduce coordinators to sort of the anatomy of research and will be used as a primer for coordinators who haven't been exposed to research in a while or maybe never exposed to research. So we're also hard at work in developing a handbook to complement the Intro to Clinical Research course, which will provide more detail into the requirements and approval processes for all of those represented offices and committees. Once the basic course is rolled out to new incoming coordinators, we'll begin working to roll out our skilled and advanced level curriculums later in 2023, so stay tuned. And because we'll utilize CITI for much of the basic course content, we're also planning to add a course specifically for principal investigators. Right now, no decision's been made on whether that will be required or in lieu of the existing educational requirements in CITI, but it is a course that we thought would be extremely useful for principal investigators, so we do plan to subscribe to that. So for your information, these are the 8 competency domains that our curriculum is built off of. So Sandra, Lucy, and I have been working to ensure that all of the areas that you see on your screen will be covered in the new Clinical Research Coordinator curriculum. So we're really excited to get that rolled out. So now on to EIRB redesign. Again, hashtag new system. We can't let that hashtag fall. So I wanted to talk about some of the highlights of the new system. This is not an inclusive list, and we'll certainly be providing you with any updates on the system as we have more to share and show. But first, the smart form is going to be redesigned, and we plan to ask questions one time. In our current smart form, I think we ask for an IND number in 4 different areas, and it causes reporting challenges for us. So now questions will be asked one time, and we'll use a lot of hide and show and branching logic. All of the supplemental forms that can be incorporated will be incorporated. So that means Form B, vulnerable population forms, Form C, etc. This is going to result in fewer uploads for you, less documents for all of us to manage. All projects will start in EIRB with the new system and then push to Velos. So EIRB will be the source of truth for study-related information, and only certain studies will be required to register their participants in Velos. Some of those are Parkland and Children's studies will be required to register in Velos, and UT Southwestern studies may be required if any clinical procedures are going to be ordered in Epic. All projects will be submitted and tracked in EIRB. So this includes non-human, non-research, the Y1, Y2s that are currently being emailed, emergency use, single patient expanded access. Everything will be moved from email into the EIRB system. A single IRB portal will be created, which will allow non-UT Southwestern site PIs that are relying on UT Southwestern's IRB to submit modifications, reportable events, and continuing review updates, rather than requiring our lead investigator to go out and gather all of that information and submit it to us. Reliance details that are currently in REDCap will now be captured in EIRB. You'll have more transparency, so there will be a project progress tracker, which I like to think of as a pizza tracker, to see where the study is in the review process. Ancillary reviews will also be tracked in EIRB, so sure, IBC, PRMC as they are now, but also institutional conflict of interest, performance site reviews, inclusion of students, that's currently a Form N, ISAC, etc. Those will all be managed within the EIRB system. And planned go live is August of 2023. Stay tuned. We will update you if that date changes. So now I just want to briefly discuss upcoming Research Matters presentation topics. This is our schedule through the end of fiscal year 2023. We hope that you'll continue to join us each month as we have developed a great line of informational sessions coming up. Particularly with our SI Support mini-series. It's a 5-part mini-series that will just be the start of each of the Research Matters sessions starting in March and running through July to help investigators understand the requirements for maintaining their INDs and IDEs with the FDA. And if you have something you'd like us to cover at a future Research Matters, please send an email or complete the evaluation. And with that, I thank you for your time and I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone. Okay, well, this does conclude the presentations for today's session. Please submit any questions you have now. We will be able to field your questions and respond even after the event has ended, as long as you do not leave the meeting. And while we wait for you to get them typed up, here again is a link to the survey and the QR code. So if you can, please just spend a few minutes to complete the questions, as we do use the information to improve the content of the sessions and how we present them. And we will also be able to see what areas we need to work on in the office and what areas we are excelling in. So with that, I'm going to conclude. I just want to thank our presenters, Mayed, Rasija, and Rhonda, and thank you all for attending today's session. The next Research Matters session is scheduled for February 21st, and so we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.